Heavy Russian shelling hit a neighbourhood in the west of Kyiv overnight, devastating a shopping mall. The building was completely destroyed. The ruins were still smouldering on Monday morning with smoke emerging. Fires erupted on several floors of the building. Cars in the parking lot went up in flames. Emergency services say at least 4 people have died from the shelling. In the meantime, Ukraine has rejected demands from Russia to surrender the eastern port city of Mariupol. Russia says it would guarantee safe passage out of the city for those who lay down their arms and open humanitarian corridors for trapped civilians. After weeks under siege, Mariupol is cut off from food, water and other supplies.
Russian state television records the destruction in Mariupol. Russia's military has managed to take parts of the besieged city following heavy bombardment. The price of its progress: burnt-out buildings and traumatised residents. A nearby steel plant was also hit. Russia claims to be denazifying Ukraine, but during an address to the Israeli parliament, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, himself Jewish, said it was Russia's invasion which was akin to Nazism.
On the 24th of February 1920, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, NSDAP, was founded. It's a party who took millions of lives, destroyed half the country, tried to kill nations. 102 years later, on 24th of February, a criminal order was given to launch a large-scale Russian invasion on Ukraine.
They've taken to burying the dead next to their homes in Mariupol, with graveyards out of reach due to the fighting. Bodies line the streets as the Russian chokehold squeezes life out of the city. The war is wreaking havoc in other parts of the country too. Near Kyiv, people were evacuated from the fighting to the Bovary suburb of the capital.
We were evacuated from Shevchenko village. There was terrible shooting day and night. This is God's nightmare. All of our buildings are demolished. It's just a terrible war.
But everywhere the Russians go, they are met with defiance. In the occupied city of Kherson, angry residents forced Russian trucks to a stop and eventually to turn around. More evidence the Russian invasion is not going to plan.
Let's go over to DW correspondent Fanny Farchar. Fanny, we're seeing some awful pictures of destruction coming in caused by Russian bombing in the capital, Kyiv. What can you tell us about that?
This attack apparently took place in Podil district Sunday night, late Sunday night, after a relatively calm weekend actually in Kyiv, relative of course in terms of the context of this entire situation here in Ukraine on the ground since 3 weeks. Now Podil district is a historic district of the capital, and where the attack took place, this is sort of like a residential area. So not only that shopping center was hit, but also homes. It's unclear, however, whether those missiles hit directly the target or whether actually this is debris that came down after Ukraine took down the missile. So there is some conflicting information there. What we know, according to local authorities, that at least 4 people have died, many injured, and we are basically also waiting for more information to come in. But regardless, of course, it shows you that even though they're all around for the past week, since this full-scale invasion has begun, and Russia keeps claiming that they only are interested in hitting military targets. Clearly, that's not the case, unfortunately, as we see not only in Kyiv but other parts of Ukraine as well, especially also in Mariupol, that civilians are bearing the brunt of all of this. And so many parts of Ukraine are turning into a living hell, especially in Mariupol, where the situation becomes dire by the hour.
Well, tell us more about that port city. It's in the south of the country. We've heard that the Russian deadline for the surrender of the city has passed. What can we expect next there?
Both Russia and Ukraine claim that there are going to be humanitarian corridors set up, or rather an attempt to put those humanitarian corridors in action. Of course, we have seen that attempt failing several times over the course of the week and the past week, and really wonder, the question is for civilians on the ground, they wonder if on a higher, on a more significant level, people can exit this city that really goes through heavy bombardment for days, for weeks actually, and people there are growing not just frustrated but increasingly uncertain what they should do. Should they choose to stay? But that means fatal consequences if you do not have access to food, if you do not have access to power, or should they risk what some actually have done during the past couple of days, trying to leave Mariupol on foot. We do not know if the humanitarian corridors are going to work this time, but of course people hope they have to work. Otherwise, this humanitarian catastrophe that we have also seen in the report before is just going to worsen with no end in sight. So really, it's like 5 to noon, if not actually 5 afternoon, when it comes to the devastating situation in Mariupol.
And Fanny, what about the situation where you are in the west, in Lviv, which has become a major transit point for the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing this violence?
At first sight, very peaceful. This is the western part of Ukraine, even though, of course, also a airport here, a civilian airport, a place nearby was attacked a couple of days ago. People here are trying to go about their normal lives. At the same time, of course, nothing is normal. So many locals here have taken in refugees, internally displaced people, people who were coming from Kyiv, Kherson, other parts of Ukraine. And of course, people here on the ground are asking themselves just how long this is going to continue. They actually talk to us, thinking that we are representatives in Germany or even the German government in that way, because we report for Deutsche Welle, and they're asking us to call on the German government to help close the sky here over Ukraine so this bombardment can finally stop. This is the situation here in Lviv, while of course the mayor of the city is also calling on international organizations to step up their financial aid, because he says it cannot go on indefinitely, that Lviv has to bear the brunt in terms of trying to provide shelter for tens and tens of thousands of people who are coming here from the east, from the central part of Ukraine, trying to escape bombardment, and then basically stranded here as they're trying to make their way out towards Poland.
And it sounds like the air bombardment is only escalating, Russia claiming at least twice to have used hypersonic missiles in the past couple of days. What can you tell us about that?
Several of those hypersonic missiles apparently were used by Russia, something that Ukraine never verified. Ukraine did say, however, that in a small town in Delatin that we visited yesterday, in a neighboring state from here, that an attack took place. So we actually checked in that village of about 8,000 people. What do they know about such an attack? I mean, we're talking about a hypersonic, alleged hypersonic missile, which can travel up to 6,000 kilometers per hour. So this is really a speed we're speaking about that would bring a new level to military strategy, in fighting the Ukrainians. Now, whether that missile actually hit, we didn't receive that information on the ground. Rather, and it was quite interesting for us to observe, people were actually quite concerned to answer any of the questions revolving around the potential hypersonic missile that may have hit that area. Let's have a look and find out why that is.
We are in Delatin, a rural town in western Ukraine. So far, it's been out of focus, but that changed last weekend.
Russia claims it used a hypersonic missile for the first time in combat in Ukraine in this village behind me, destroying a military warehouse. Now, the Ukrainian government has not verified this type of missile was used.
And people here are tight-lipped about the alleged attack, fearing what else may follow from Russia. I haven't heard any information about this, if any confirmation exists or not. But the situation is stressful. All the time we wait for something unexpected to happen. Many of those who are still staying here come to this church every day to seek peace and calm. But the priest himself is concerned, he says. He too does not want to speak on camera about the alleged hypersonic attack. But he says, the situation may become worse, depending on the mood of the enemy. We don't know what he wants because there is no reasonable logic behind these things. Because when strategic objects are captured, it's clear. But when schools, kindergarten, hospitals are destroyed, there is no hope for anything good. Why all the silence in this community here? This woman wants to explain. She says the state governor urges people to not publish anything when an airstrike takes place, allegedly to not help the enemy.
Personally, I didn't hear anything, I didn't saw anything, and even if I would see or hear something, we shouldn't talk about such things, as our government says that we shouldn't talk, we should keep quiet.
The Ukrainian government in Kyiv did not provide any further details of what actually happened here in Delatin, but people's response to stay reserved indicates the psychological impact of a war that will go into week number 4.
So people are quite cautious, by the way, not only in that local town, in that small village that we visited yesterday, but we also experienced while we're doing our job here on the ground, the people are concerned sometimes about our presence, saying if you report from this town, maybe Russia is going to attack us. So now, almost 4 weeks into this terrible war in Ukraine, people are changing a little bit their reaction in terms of they do want, of course, the world to know what's going on in Ukraine, but at the same time, they're also concerned just how much should be known about what's going on in this country that may provoke, in their view, further attacks from Russia, something that nobody here wants in Ukraine.
Fanny Fachar for us, reporting there from Lviv, and great getting that information out to the world. Thank you very much. Right from the start of this war, civilians have been caught in the crossfire in Russia's bombardment of Ukrainian cities, with many families unable to flee their homes, though some of those suffering the most are children. One hospital in Kyiv is trying to treat young survivors despite the challenges.
Volodymyr is lucky to be alive. The car he was travelling in was hit by gunfire 2 days after Russia invaded Ukraine. His father and his 6-year-old cousin were killed. Although the 13-year-old survived, he's been left with serious injuries.
His face was hurt, his jaw and his nose were broken, his arm was hit, his leg was hit in 2 places as well as his other leg. He had 1 or 2 bullets in his back. I can't remember.
Staff working at this children's hospital in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv stay here round the clock. They have to because of the security situation and the amount of work they have. These are tough times.
It's really terrible. It's challenging. Emotionally, it's awful. We live in the hospital, we don't go home. We are available 24/7 and any time, day, night, morning, evening. We rush to help the children, and it's really difficult.
Maybe after war, some of us needs to psycho support, maybe, but now we only focused on people treatment, children treatment.
Volodymyr will need more surgery. Doctors hope he will be able to walk again, but no one really knows if his emotional scars will ever heal.
EU foreign ministers and defence ministers are meeting again in Brussels, with the war in Ukraine set to dominate the agenda. The prospect of tightening sanctions against Russia is on the table. The ministers are also expected to discuss whether or not to impose an oil embargo on the country. The meeting comes ahead of a visit from US President Joe Biden to Brussels on Thursday. For more, joining us from Brussels is DW correspondent Bernd Riegert. Bernd, the foreign and defence ministers will discuss this strategic compass today in Brussels. Tell us more about that.
Well, it is a coincidence that this paper is now ready on the table. It was on the making for 3 years now, since 2019. Then a French and a German initiative When Mr. Trump was still president in the United States, the EU was thinking about how can we defend ourselves without the Americans. NATO was called brain dead, you might remember. But now this all has changed, of course, after the Russian aggression, after the Russian invasion. This paper was overhauled, and now it says the EU cannot defend itself alone. We need NATO, and NATO will be the structure that we have to rely on. The EU can only strengthen its abilities to buy weapons, to develop weapons, to do things like that. But the military branch will be NATO also for Europe. And this is also a reassurance for the Americans, for Joe Biden, who will come to Brussels, as you mentioned. So this paper is a strategic compass assessing what threats are there, and the main threat now is Russia, but also China is mentioned, also terrorism around the EU in Africa and other places. But as I said, this paper is, well, not that relevant anymore. And as Emmanuel Macron put it, the French president, NATO now got an electric shock after the invasion, and NATO is at the forefront of all military strategies now.
And Bernd, as far as the war in Ukraine goes and the reaction to Russia, are we going to see an oil embargo, or is that just going to be talked about?
Well, I'm not sure that they will actually decide anything today. There are some countries that demand more and even tougher sanctions than we have already in place, an energy embargo, oil, gas. But this is very unlikely because not only Germany, but also Italy, Bulgaria and others are opposed to that because they say we would harm ourselves more than we would harm the Russians. But other countries like Poland are demanding that. What is sure that there will be more money earmarked for Ukraine to buy weapons and supplies. There will also be talk about shipping more weapons to Ukraine, but this will not be made publicly anymore because of security reasons. The foreign ministers and defense ministers don't want to talk about this anymore. And there's also a fifth round of sanctions under preparation, but these sanctions will include more oligarchs, more Russian companies, but not energy so far as we know.
At the same time, we've seen millions of people fleeing the fighting and so many Ukrainians turning up in different parts of Europe, but no distribution plan. Is that something that's going to be discussed by the ministers?
The ministers will surely discuss about this, but there are also no decision is expected right now because the flow of refugees is still going as expected. The bulk of the people are living in Poland now, in Moldova, in Slovakia, Hungary and other neighboring countries. And there was no official request from Poland actually to relocate refugees. But as the war goes on, there will be also the need to have a distribution system, and Germany is asking for that. So we will see more maybe next week when the interior ministers meet for an extra meeting here.
Bernd Riegert for us in Brussels. Thanks for the update.